Hi everyone, this is Leroy here from Intune Instruments Dubai, UAE. What I have today on the workbench is this wonderful Electro acoustic classical guitar made by Ibanez. The client brought this guitar to me complaining of two main problems that you have on guitars which have either never been set up. One has to do with the string action, where he found the string action quite high. Now, when I did initially check the lay of the neck, there was a little bit of relief. You could say around about 7th thou to 8th thou, around the 6th to 7th fret along the neck. But when I did measure the action, it came up to 3.5 millimeters on the 12th fret, the high E string, and 4.5 millimeters on the low bass string. Now, there is sufficient headroom that we have, or real estate, you could say, on the saddle over here. And there's an opportunity to take down the saddle around about 2.5 to maximum 3 millimeters. So we can definitely take care and address the high action of this particular guitar. Now, if I run a straight edge across this guitar, as you can see, the neck has moved over time, and generally what you like to see is that this section of the straight edge just kissing the top part of the bridge. But here you can see that it is already touching the bridge. But nevertheless, it is not so bad and can be addressed. Now, the second problem that he brought to me was, even though there was high action, there was quite a lot of buzzing, especially around this area of the fretboard. And what I did initially check was firstly with a 4-inch straight edge. And while I did find a few spots of ticking or rocking, one being over here, it didn't strike me that there was generally a serious problem at first. Now, obviously, when you have a small nick and rock, whatever, you can always address this with some minor fret pressing or leveling at that particular spot. But then, when I did play this guitar, and it said it shouldn't be buzzing around here, so maybe the lay of the neck is not correct. And therefore, and the only way to check this is by then checking it with different straight edges of different dimensions. So we have one here. So I'm checking this with the 4-inch. So it rocks over here, but here it's fine. So this is the high spot around here. Again, typically over here, fine over here. These are all fine. Now I then brought in my 6-inch straight edge. And what I have here is a 2 thou feeler gauge. And if you will notice, the feeler gauge passes under through over here, but this section, it doesn't. This signifies that this particular guitar has a typical neck to body junction issue. And what we have around here is basically, again, this is an early detection. We still need to check it with a 10-inch. But what I typically find over here right now is that this particular area, which should be sloping slightly, is raised up. So it needs to be addressed and corrected. Okay? And as you can see, the straight edge, it doesn't pass here to but right through. The bass side is slightly better. It's fine around here. there's a spot around here, which is, so this is the high spot, and we typically have problems around here. Now I'll come in with my 10-inch, and this will tell me exactly how bad or wrapped this section is. And my feeler gauge doesn't go in, but over here we have this gap, what we found on the 6-inch. Again over here. And when I come to this section of the neck, it's pretty okay, excepting for this spot that we already identified with the 4-inch. Again, seems fine over here. And again, this section needs to be kind of addressed. So now that we've identified the high spots or the trouble areas on the fretboard, it's time now to start the job. So before we go any further, what I like to do is, this is a rosewood fingerboard. There are no inlay work, so it's safe to kind of run the fret file across the fretboard. But since this guitar has electronics and I don't want to mirror the finish, I always ensure on most of my guitars I have some protection. So we're just kind of carving out some EVO foam to be put on this guitar. Taking the impression. So now that we have masked the guitar, we'll start the leveling job. What I like to do is first get rid of those high spot areas around this section of the neck, and then later on come in with a leveling beam and level even the uneven spots over here. Now what I want to do is basically not take out too much of real estate of the frets, especially around this portion, because there are just few spots which need to be kind of addressed over here. But what we find from the lay of the neck is this section is basically high, so we need to focus more on this section. So I'm crossing my strokes to ensure that I maintain the radius of the fingerboard. So let's do my first check over here. Now we still have some gaps which need to be taken care of. Keep going. And as you can see, I've already addressed this spot. We no more have a high spot. We don't have the feeler gauge, which is tooth out at the moment, that I'm using, passing under the straight edge. Okay. So the next step now is to do a leveling, my leveling of the frets across the fretboard. So now what I'm going to do is use this leveling beam. And what I have here with me is this 18-inch or 45.6 centimeter in length. And I'm going to first do these strokes. Again, I don't want to take out too much because there's not much real estate on these frets. So now, having leveled all the frets, what I've done is recrowned all the frets using a fret recrowning file. I typically like to use the Hosco large file and just basically angling my strokes, leaving the centers untouched. That's what we need to do. Now the next step is, what I'm going to do is basically take care of the fret ends. I'm using here a Stuart McDonald's fret end file. So it has a smooth bottom, so I do not damage the rosewood on this fingerboard. So now, having leveled the frets, recrowned, taken care of the fret ends, it's now time to start the process of repolishing. So what I have right now here with me is different grits of sandpaper starting from 320 and going up to 2000. And what I'm going to do is basically take off all the tooling marks that I've created with the fret file. Four hundred grit. So now what I'm going to do is basically buff off all the frets, and then finally with a very high grade of steel wool come in and then polish all the frets. So what I've applied on the buffing wheel is some Jeweler's Rouge. And now for the final test to check to see if our fret leveling has been done accurately, I'm going to use the 10-inch to check to see with a 2 thou feeler gauge. And as you can see, I have the feeler gauge which is not slipping through any of the frets so far. And you can then, this demonstrates the fact that whilst using the foam pad which I was using basically to remove the tooling marks, it didn't change the orientation or the level of the frets. So what it did, it basically just glided over the frets, took off all the tooling marks, polished the frets, and also kept the radius of the fingerboard or the frets intact. There's none over here. Checking this section of the fingerboard. So now let's check this guitar and see how it sounds. I've re-leveled the frets, re-crowned and re-polished, also taken care of the entire setup of this guitar, adjusted the action at the 12th fret, which is now down to 3 millimeters on the first string of the 12th fret and 3.5 to 3.75 millimeters on the 6th string of the 12th fret. So I had some headroom on the saddle, so I could take that down by around about 2 millimeters and around about 2.5 millimeters on the bass side. Also taking care of the nut slots. Now this is an Electro acoustic classical guitar which needs to be actually plugged in. But I'm just going to kind of record this. It's not going to have a full-bodied sound of a proper full-body classical guitar, but nevertheless you'll get an idea. So let's first check to see if there are any buzzes along the layer of the neck. The first string. So as you will notice, there's absolutely no buzzing along the layer of the neck. So now let's hear it, how it sounds.